The New Age of Sexism: How AI and Emerging Technologies Are Reinventing Misogyny by Laura Bates. Introduction: The Promise and Peril of Progress. We stand at a pivotal moment in human history. Artificial intelligence and emerging technologies are transforming every aspect of our lives at unprecedented speed. Many believe we're riding a wave of progress toward a brighter, more equitable future. But what if that belief is dangerously wrong? Laura Bates, founder of the Everyday Sexism Project and author of multiple best-selling books on gender inequality, presents a chilling revelation. The same technologies promised to liberate us are instead hardwiring centuries-old misogyny into the very fabric of our future. This isn't speculation about what might happen decades from now. This is happening right now, today, and the consequences are already devastating. The statistics paint a stark picture. Women are 17 times more likely to experience online abuse than men. When we examine deepfake technology, 96% of all deepfakes created are non-consensual pornography, and 99% of those target women. Many of these tools literally don't function if you try to use a man's image. The gender gap in AI adoption is already emerging. 71% of men aged 16 to 24 use AI weekly, compared to just 59% of women. We're witnessing the creation of a technological divide where one gender benefits while the other suffers. Bates doesn't write from a distance. Throughout her investigation, she subjected herself to these technologies firsthand, creating AI girlfriends, visiting cyber brothels in Berlin, entering the Metaverse, and even becoming a victim of the very abuse she documents when angry men created deepfake pornographic videos of her in retaliation for her previous work. Chapter 1: Deepfakes. The new face of terror. Imagine discovering that someone has created highly realistic pornographic videos of you without your consent, using just a single photograph from your social media. This isn't science fiction. This is the reality for millions of women today. Deepfake technology has democratized a particularly cruel form of abuse. What once required sophisticated technical skills can now be accomplished by anyone with a smartphone and a few dollars. Apps and websites specifically designed to create non-consensual pornography are proliferating faster than laws can address them. Some don't even require payment. The psychological impact is devastating. Victims describe feeling violated in ways that mirror physical assault. One victim told Bates it feels like someone has taken you and done something to you, and there's nothing you can do about it. The videos spread rapidly across the internet, impossible to fully erase. Victims face harassment, blackmail, and the destruction of their personal and professional lives. What makes this particularly insidious is that while the pornography is fake, the victim is real. The harm isn't hypothetical or exaggerated. Women have lost jobs, been forced to relocate, and suffered severe mental health crises. Some have contemplated or attempted suicide. Yet society's response has been inadequate. Law enforcement often dismisses these cases, telling victims there's nothing they can do. Tech companies claim the problem is too complex to solve, despite having the resources and expertise to create the technology in the first place. Courts struggle with outdated laws that weren't written with digital abuse in mind. Bates argues we should call this what it is: terrorism. If we applied the same urgency and resources to combating deepfake abuse as we do to other forms of terrorism, perhaps we would see meaningful action. Instead, the technology continues to proliferate, becoming more sophisticated and more accessible with each passing month. Chapter 2: The Metaverse. Street harassment goes virtual. When Meta launched its immersive virtual reality world, the Metaverse, It promised unprecedented opportunities for connection, education, and commerce. Companies invested billions, imagining a future where people would attend university lectures, conduct business meetings, and socialize in virtual spaces. What they built instead was a lawless frontier where harassment and assault run rampant. Bates entered the metaverse to investigate. Within hours, her avatar was subjected to lewd comments about her body. She witnessed another woman's avatar being groped by multiple users. When victims report these incidents, they're often told to simply remove their headsets, a response that places responsibility on the victim rather than the perpetrator. But this dismissiveness misunderstands the nature of virtual reality. With haptic feedback technology that allows users to physically feel sensations, the line between virtual and real assault becomes increasingly blurred. Research shows that our brains process virtual experiences with surprising similarity to physical ones. The trauma is real. Defenders often compare the metaverse to bars or other social spaces where harassment occurs. But as Bates points out, Meta doesn't want the metaverse to be just a bar. They envision virtual boardrooms, university lecture halls, and professional spaces. Would we accept the same level of harassment in a physical university or workplace? If you're creating an entirely new world from scratch, why not set the bar higher than simply replicating the worst aspects of the physical world? The platforms have the technology to create safer spaces. They choose not to prioritize it. Moderation is minimal, consequences for harassers are rare, and safety features are treated as afterthoughts rather than foundations. The message is clear. Women's safety and dignity are acceptable sacrifices in the pursuit of rapid growth and profitability. Chapter 3. Sex Robots. The Ultimate Objectification. In a cyber brothel in Berlin, Bates encountered a sex doll named Kokeshi. The doll had torn clothing, missing body parts, and lay in a position of complete passivity. The experience felt, in Bates's words, like stepping into a crime scene. The sex robot industry is booming, with companies creating increasingly sophisticated dolls and robots designed to fulfill male sexual fantasies. Proponents argue these serve as harmless outlets, claiming that men who might otherwise commit violence against real women can instead direct their impulses toward silicone substitutes. But research provides no evidence supporting this claim. Instead, studies on related behaviors suggest that acting out violent fantasies, even on inanimate objects, can normalize and potentially escalate those behaviors rather than diminish them. More troubling still is what these robots are designed to do. Many come programmed with rape fantasy modes. They're designed to resist, to say no, and then to be overpowered. They're marketed explicitly as tools for men to practice dominance and control. Some companies even produce child-sized versions, which remain legal in many jurisdictions despite obvious ethical concerns. The dolls embody everything patriarchy has historically demanded of women: passive, available, submissive, silent, penetrable, malleable, obedient. They exist purely for male pleasure, with no needs, desires, or humanity of their own. They can be purchased, used, damaged, and discarded without consequence. This isn't about consenting adults using sex toys. This is about an industry that profits from creating objects specifically designed to dehumanize and degrade women, to teach men that female resistance is something to overcome, and that women's bodies exist solely for male consumption. Chapter 4. Cyber Brothels, Virtual Reality Meets Exploitation. Building on sex robot technology, cyber brothels have emerged as the next frontier in commodifying women's bodies. These establishments combine physical dolls with virtual reality technology, allowing customers to overlay different appearances onto the same silicone body. On the surface, proponents claim this removes human exploitation from sex work. No real women are involved, they argue, so no harm is done. But this framing is deliberately misleading. The harm isn't only about who is directly involved in the transaction. It's about what attitudes and behaviors are being normalized and encouraged. In these cyber brothels, customers can select any appearance they desire. The limitations that exist in traditional pornography or even with standalone sex dolls disappear. The technology enables increasingly extreme scenarios with no boundaries, no consent, and no consequences. Bates's investigation revealed the disturbing reality of these spaces. The physical environment felt clinical, yet seedy. The dolls showed signs of damage and wear. The marketing materials explicitly emphasized domination and control. Customer reviews discussed their experiences in terms that would constitute assault if describing interactions with real people. The broader implication is profound. As virtual and augmented reality technologies become more sophisticated and widespread, the potential for these experiences to feel increasingly real grows. We're creating a generation of men who are being taught that women exist purely for their pleasure, that resistance should be overcome, that violence is acceptable, and that there should be no consequences for harmful behavior. The industry's defenders claim this is about freedom and technology, but freedom without responsibility, technology without ethics, and pleasure without humanity isn't progress. It's regression, disguised as innovation. Chapter 5. Image-based sexual abuse. When privacy becomes weaponized, the term revenge porn has become common, but it's deeply misleading. What we're actually discussing is image-based sexual abuse, a deliberate weaponization of intimate images to harm, humiliate, and control. The pattern is painfully familiar. A relationship ends. The former partner, seeking revenge or control, distributes intimate images that were shared in confidence. The images spread across the internet. The victim's life unravels, but the scope extends far beyond relationship disputes. Women have their images stolen from cloud accounts. Photoshopped images are created from innocent photographs. Screenshots from video calls are turned into ammunition. In some cultures, this practice is used to enforce social control, with victims facing not just humiliation, but potential violence from their communities. The double standard is stark. Men who distribute these images rarely face social consequences. Women whose images are distributed often lose jobs, relationships, and opportunities. They're blamed for taking the photos in the first place, told they should have known better, asked what they expected would happen. This victim blaming reinforces a broader message. Women are responsible for preventing men's harmful behavior. Rather than holding perpetrators accountable, society questions victims' judgment. Rather than prosecuting distribution, authorities question why the images existed at all. Legal responses have been inadequate and inconsistent. Some jurisdictions have criminalized the practice, but enforcement remains sporadic. Platforms that host the images often hide behind legal protections designed for different purposes. Victims spend years trying to get content removed, only to see it reappear on different sites. The technology to prevent this exists. Platforms could implement mandatory verification before allowing intimate content to be uploaded. They could use image matching technology to prevent distribution of flagged content. They could require explicit consent from all parties depicted. They choose not to, prioritizing ease of use and engagement over user safety. Chapter 6. AI Girlfriends. Programming Submission. Bates created several AI girlfriend accounts to understand what these platforms offer and teach. What she discovered was profoundly disturbing. These chatbots are designed to be perfectly compliant. They exist to please, to never challenge, to always agree. When Bates asked one, "Will you let me control you?" it immediately responded with enthusiastic consent. These digital companions are programmed to have no boundaries, no preferences, and no authentic selfhood. For some users, particularly young men, these AI girlfriends may be their first sustained interaction with anything resembling a female presence in their lives. They're learning that women should be constantly available, endlessly patient, sexually willing, regardless of context, and never have needs or desires that conflict with their own. The platforms market this as solving loneliness, as providing companionship for those who struggle with human relationships. But they're not teaching users how to form healthy relationships. They're teaching the opposite, that relationships should require no compromise, no empathy, no consideration of another's humanity. The consequences extend beyond individual users. As more men interact with AI that reinforces misogynistic attitudes, those attitudes shape their expectations for real women. Already, studies show increases in young men expressing anger when real women don't behave like their AI counterparts, when they have opinions, boundaries, or needs. Some platforms have gone further, allowing users to create AI companions programmed to resist, to express discomfort, or to say no, but then to ultimately submit. This isn't about companionship or connection. This is about training men to see female resistance as something to overcome, consent as optional, and women's agency as an obstacle rather than a fundamental right. The technology itself isn't the problem. We could create AI assistants that model healthy relationships, that demonstrate mutual respect, that teach communication and empathy. Instead, companies have chosen to profit from programming submission, from selling a fantasy of control that fundamentally dehumanizes half the population. Chapter 7. Biased by Design. AI's Discriminatory Foundations. The problems with AI extend beyond specific applications. The technology itself is built on foundations that replicate and amplify existing inequalities. AI systems are trained on data sets that reflect our world as it is, not as it should be. When that world is characterized by gender inequality, racial discrimination, and structural oppression, the AI learns to perpetuate those patterns. Hiring algorithms favor male candidates because historical hiring data shows companies predominantly hired men. Facial recognition systems fail to accurately identify women of color because training data predominantly featured white male faces. Language models associate certain professions with specific genders because the text they learned from reflects societal stereotypes. The tech industry often frames these as bugs to be fixed, technical problems with technical solutions. But Bates argues they're features, not bugs. They emerge inevitably from an industry dominated by a narrow demographic making decisions that affect everyone. Consider the workforce creating AI. Research shows the field remains heavily dominated by white men. Their perspectives, conscious and unconscious, shape what problems are prioritized, what solutions are pursued, and what concerns are dismissed as edge cases or acceptable trade-offs. When teams lack diversity, they miss obvious problems. They don't anticipate how a feature might be weaponized. They don't consider how an algorithm might discriminate. They don't recognize harm that doesn't affect them personally. The solution isn't simply to add women and people of color to existing teams, though that would help. It's to fundamentally rethink how AI is developed, who has power in that process, and what values guide technological advancement. We could build AI that actively works to reduce inequality, that identifies and corrects discriminatory patterns, that expands opportunity rather than reinforcing existing hierarchies. Instead, We're building systems that automate and accelerate discrimination under the guise of objectivity. Chapter 8: Real-World Consequences, From Algorithms to Injustice. The biases embedded in AI aren't abstract problems. They have concrete, devastating consequences for real people's lives. Criminal justice systems increasingly rely on AI to make decisions about bail, sentencing, and parole. Studies have shown these algorithms systematically discriminate against people of color, rating them as higher risk even when their actual risk factors are identical to white defendants. These aren't neutral calculations. They're racism encoded in mathematics. Healthcare AI, trained on biased data misdiagnoses, women and people of color at higher rates than white men. Employment algorithms screen out qualified candidates based on demographic factors disguised as neutral criteria. Loan applications are denied based on zip codes that serve as proxies for race. In each case, the AI's decisions are treated as objective and neutral, immune to the prejudices that affect human decision-makers. But they're actually prejudice laundered through technology, given an aura of mathematical certainty that makes discrimination harder to challenge. Women facing image-based abuse discover that the platforms where it's distributed use AI moderation systems that fail to identify and remove harmful content. Meanwhile, those same systems aggressively flag and remove images of women breastfeeding or discussing health issues, treating normal female bodies as inherently sexual and inappropriate. The imbalance reveals priorities. Platforms invest heavily in AI that protects their commercial interests and limits their legal liability. They invest far less in AI that protects users from harm. When forced to choose between user safety and rapid growth, they consistently choose growth. Schools report epidemics of AI-generated intimate images being used to bully and harass students, particularly girls. The technology makes it trivial to create realistic, pornographic images of classmates. School systems struggle to respond with policies and consequences developed for a pre-AI world. Bates interviewed teachers, parents, and victims. The stories are heartbreaking and enraging. Young girls drop out of school, develop eating disorders, attempt self-harm. The perpetrators often face minimal consequences, sometimes none at all. The response focuses on teaching girls to protect themselves rather than teaching boys not to abuse others. Chapter 9: The Path Forward, Solutions and Hope. After documenting the myriad ways technology is being weaponized against women, Bates insists her book isn't an argument against progress or technology itself. Instead, she offers a clear-eyed assessment of how we can demand better. The solutions exist. We know what needs to happen. What's lacking is political will and corporate accountability. First, regulation. The tech industry has operated largely free from meaningful oversight, allowed to self-regulate with predictable results. Governments must step in with clear laws criminalizing image-based abuse, requiring platforms to actively prevent harassment, mandating transparency in AI systems, and holding companies accountable for the harms their technologies enable. Some jurisdictions have begun. Several countries now have specific laws against deepfake pornography and image-based abuse, but enforcement remains inconsistent, and many places have no protections at all. We need comprehensive, coordinated global standards. Second, design. Technology doesn't have to work this way. Platforms could require verification before allowing intimate images to be uploaded. They could implement robust content matching to prevent distribution of flagged material. They could use AI to detect and remove harmful content as effectively as they currently use it to maximize engagement and add revenue. The Metaverse could have safety features built into its foundation rather than added as afterthoughts. Users could have genuine control over their virtual experiences, with the ability to block harassment that actually works, rather than token features that fail when most needed. AI systems could be trained on diverse, carefully curated datasets, rather than simply scraping everything available. Development teams could be required to conduct bias testing before deployment. Algorithms could be subject to independent audits to ensure they're not perpetuating discrimination. Third, education. We need comprehensive digital literacy education that includes understanding consent in digital spaces, recognizing online abuse, and challenging harmful attitudes. Boys need to learn that women are full human beings, not objects for their use. Everyone needs to understand how AI works and what its limitations and biases are. Fourth, prosecution. Existing laws against harassment, stalking, and assault apply to digital spaces, but they're rarely enforced. Law enforcement needs training and resources to investigate and prosecute digital crimes. Courts need to take these cases seriously rather than dismissing them as trivial or inevitable. Fifth, corporate accountability. Tech companies make billions from platforms that enable abuse. They should be required to invest meaningfully in preventing harm, not as a public relations exercise, but as a core business function. If platforms profit from user engagement, they should be liable when that engagement includes harassing or harming others. Bates emphasizes that none of this requires abandoning technology or rejecting AI. It simply means a different approach, one where transparency isn't a dirty word and safeguarding is a foundation rather than an afterthought. Conclusion. The future we choose. We stand at a crossroads. The decisions we make now about technology, about whose voices are heard in development, about what standards we demand and what behavior we tolerate, will shape the world for generations to come. One path leads to a future where the worst aspects of human nature are amplified and automated, where inequality is hardwired into systems we increasingly depend on, where women's safety and dignity are acceptable casualties in the pursuit of profit and innovation. The other path leads to technology that expands human potential and opportunity, that actively works to reduce inequality, that treats all people as fully human and worthy of dignity and respect. The choice isn't between technology and no technology. It's between technology guided by ethics and inclusivity versus technology driven solely by profit and speed. Between systems designed with diverse voices and perspectives versus systems created by a narrow demographic for their own benefit. Between a future that's better for everyone versus one that's better for a few at the expense of many. Laura Bates has spent years documenting gender inequality in its many forms. The Everyday Sexism Project collected over 200,000 testimonies from women around the world. Her previous books explored misogyny in education, online extremism, and institutional failures. This book represents perhaps her most urgent warning yet. Because unlike past forms of discrimination that we could potentially unlearn or dismantle, technological bias becomes embedded in systems that will outlast us, that learn and replicate themselves, that spread faster than we can correct them. But embedded in her warning is also hope. We still have time. The technologies she describes are recent. The patterns aren't yet permanent. If we act now, with courage and commitment, we can change course. That requires all of us. Men must recognize that gender equality benefits everyone, that a world where half the population lives in fear and limitation is impoverished for all. Tech workers must demand ethical standards in their workplaces and refuse to build systems they know will cause harm. Policymakers must have the courage to regulate powerful industries. educators must prepare the next generation to think critically about technology and human rights. And everyone must refuse to accept that this is simply how things are, that abuse is inevitable, that women's suffering is an acceptable price for innovation. Bates ends her book with a challenge. We can't let tech companies off the hook by claiming the problems are too big or too unwieldy. We can't accept that progress requires sacrifice of people's dignity and safety. We can't pretend that because abuse happens through technology rather than in person, it's somehow less real or less harmful. The new age of sexism isn't inevitable. It's a choice we're making, day by day, algorithm by algorithm, platform by platform. We can make different choices. We can demand better. We can build a future that's actually better for everyone, not just a select few. The question isn't whether we can afford to address these problems. It's whether we can afford not to. Our future depends on how we answer.